radio's got a really important role to play during elections. And so in anticipation of that, Radiocentre's policy team commissioned some new research to look at that in more detail from a commercial radio perspective. This study was done with an independent research agency, Differentology, and overseen by our Director of External Affairs, Michael Ireland, and is a timely reminder of the value of commercial radio news. So to tell us a bit more about the findings, happy to introduce Michael Ireland.
Good morning, I'm Michael Ireland, Director of External Affairs at Radiocentre. I lead on Radiocentre's policy work, which provides our members with a voice with key stakeholders, whether that's government, parliamentarians, or regulators like Ofcom, on a range of issues that impact how our sector operates. As Matt mentioned earlier, the media bill has been one of our key areas of focus in recent years. This new legislation puts the UK at the forefront internationally of protections for radio broadcasters who increasingly rely on tech platforms for their distribution. Part of the reason we've been able to secure these protections, with the support from MPs across the political spectrum, is a direct result of the important public value that commercial radio continues to deliver to audiences every day. So stations do this in a number of different ways, but some of the most valued output is the trusted news and information that they provide. This morning, I'm excited to talk about some new research that we commissioned earlier this year that looks at how commercial radio news cuts through with listeners. Given this research looks specifically at radio's role around elections, the timing couldn't be better. As you may know, commercial radio connects with over 39 million listeners every week. And people tune into their favourite radio stations for a whole host of different reasons. Alongside the music and entertainment, stations provide listeners with regular updates on the latest developments in the world around them. In order to do this, broadcasters invest significantly in journalism. Dedicated teams of professional journalists working all across the country work to deliver trusted, accurate, and impartial commercial radio news bulletins to audiences throughout the day. Every week, commercial radio produces over 10,000 news bulletins, the majority of which contain local news. Combined, the industry employs over 200 journalists, supported by over 20 broadcast centres around all parts of the UK. And over the next 5 weeks, these bulletins will provide listeners with vital updates on all the twists and turns ahead of the general election on the 4th of July. So we know from previous research in this area that audiences really value commercial radio news. In recent years, we've published reports on how listeners value these updates and also how commercial radio connects with parts of the population that other media struggles to reach in the same way. Listeners now also have more ways than ever to engage with commercial radio news and analysis, with broadcasters having launched numerous news podcasts in recent years. Today, we're exploring new research that looks at how commercial radio news cuts through with listeners. And look, we've already had a really good endorsement from Andy this morning on the doorstep. So for this study, at the beginning of the year, we commissioned leading market research consultancy Differentology to undertake the project. The findings of this report are based on a robust online survey of over 3,000 commercial radio listeners. We also spoke to a small group of listeners in more depth to understand further about the role that radio plays in their day-to-day lives. And as we knew that there were going to be a number of elections this year, we wanted to ask specific questions about this important element. So in order to set the scene, we needed to ask about news consumption habits, and we looked at all these media: radio, both commercial and the BBC, TV, print, newspaper websites and apps, social media, and podcasts. And looking at the results, there's no getting around that news avoidance is on the rise. It's perhaps not surprising in our constantly connected world that a lot of people feel that they can be overwhelmed by the relentless flow of information, much of which is often negative. I doubt that many people here this morning would be shocked to see that social media is cited as the source of news that is most likely to be avoided due to distrust, whereas radio, along with TV, is the source that is least likely to be avoided. So widespread concern around misleading or false news definitely remains high. As you can see, 63% of listeners indicated that they were concerned or very concerned about this type of information being presented as news. It's in that context that we look at the results around trust in news. Really encouragingly, this research also found that listeners rank radio as the most trusted news source, with 7 out of 10 listeners believing the news to be factual and true. This is higher than any other media. Radio is followed by TV, with social media, perhaps unsurprisingly, coming in last. These results echo previous findings from both our own research and also that undertaken annually by the European Commission on the most trusted news sources across Europe, which Matt highlighted earlier, where radio comes out top across most countries. Listeners tell us that they value commercial radio news for its relatability, ease of access, and consistency. The researchers also asked listeners for the top 3 descriptions associated with commercial radio news, and the following came highest: useful, regular, and for people like me. So we recognise that the role of commercial radio news has particular strength at different times of the day. Listeners consistently rely on radio for their daily news updates, particularly in the morning and the afternoon. Commercial radio remains the go-to source for news in the morning for almost 7 out of 10 listeners, with a 10% uplift from when we last asked this question in 2020 during COVID. Commercial radio is also cited as the top for local news and national news, with the survey showing that these results have also increased since 2020. We do recognise, though, that other media have strengths at different times of the day, with TV cited as the best source for news updates in the evening. So next, I want to delve a bit deeper into the types of news consumption habits of commercial radio listeners. Our previous research in this area identified 3 key different types of news consumers: super seekers, those who love staying up to date with the latest news and are constantly checking for the latest updates on different media, and I definitely fall into that category myself. Enthusiasts, those who have a keen interest in news and check for updates regularly. And then outsiders, people who like to stay informed but do not usually go out their way to stay up to date. They will listen to or watch news when it comes on the radio and TV, but do not usually seek it out. Outsiders actually make up around 1/3 of the commercial radio audience, over 13 million listeners. And while they may be less interested in the news and the goings-on of the Westminster bubble, they are the group most likely to turn to commercial radio as their primary source for news. Commercial radio news has a unique ability to cut through to this audience group more so than any other media. They skew older than other groups and are much more likely to be female, have a C2DE background, as well as less likely to live in London and the South East. Outsiders are also more likely to rely on commercial radio than the BBC for regular updates. As you can see here, outsiders are a much higher proportion of swing voters as well compared to the other groups, by quite a significant margin, almost 3 times higher than super seekers and nearly double that of enthusiasts. So while most people were expecting an election later this year, it's pretty fair to say that an election before the summer wasn't what most had in mind. But as people start to focus on what the political parties have to say as polling day nears, it's important to look at how audiences will engage with this coverage. As you can see, after TV, radio is seen as the best source for regular election-related updates throughout the day, a quick summary of election-related key events, and in-depth election-related news. Commercial radio alone is the best source for audio news, with listeners rating it higher than the BBC for regular election-related updates throughout the day, and a quick summary of election-related key events, with an uplift of over 20% over the BBC. Perhaps understandably, though, the BBC rates higher for in-depth election-related news. As you all know, trusted news is vital during elections, and the research found that listeners trust radio ahead of any other media, including TV, as the most accurate and impartial news source in an election. The results for trust in radio are over twice as high for social media. This finding is especially important given the nature of political campaigning and the vital nature of factual information for elections when choosing the next government. There's also a direct correlation between trust and whether the media is regulated or not. The research also found that commercial radio cuts through with audiences from every demographic. A really encouraging 7 out of 10 listeners have taken an action after hearing news updates. So this might include discussing something heard with family and friends, searching for more information online, and tuning into other media, such as TV, to find out more. Commercial radio news around elections also cuts through to younger people in particular, who are more likely than older audiences to discuss what they've heard with friends and family. This is an important point, as Ofcom research highlights that 10% of adults now cite TikTok as a source of news, and it's even higher for young people. As we know, social media has extremely low levels of trust, so the news updates that young people hear on commercial radio are particularly valuable. So look, there's a lot here, and so just to sum up, I want to highlight what we believe are the key headlines to take away. First, radio continues to be the most trusted medium for news and is considered the most important and accurate news source during an election. In the run-up to an election, commercial radio is seen as the best form of audio for a quick summary of key events and regular updates throughout the day. Second, commercial radio news cuts through with listeners during an election, encouraging discussion and debate and acting as a catalyst for further discovery. And young people are most likely to discuss what they've heard on commercial radio with friends and family. And finally, commercial radio news has a unique ability to reach an important group of potential swing voters. Outsiders are more likely to say they don't know who they will vote for in the upcoming election, and this group is most likely to turn to commercial radio as their primary source of news. So today we're publishing the main headlines from our research, particularly all those around elections and everything else that I've covered here this morning. And then we'll follow up with a wider report on commercial radio news consumption after the summer. Thank you.